to Case Briefs with Megan. Let's make this case brief. I know it's crazy that this is a brand new format because we are just in what is called my bathroom, but I figured that there is a case and a concept that people are starting to get really worried about, and we might as well talk about the origin of birthright citizenship here in the United States. Now, a good portion of knowing what rights we do have and don't have and what's really specified come from court cases, and in this particular case, we can learn a lot about birthright citizenship from the case United States versus Wong Kim Ark. Before we dive into the actual case, let's talk for a second about what it means to be a citizen here in the United States and what did that kind of look like before this case. So when we talk about citizenship with the law, there are two different kinds of concepts that come with birthright citizenship. You know, where do you get your citizenship from? And that can either be defined with jus soli, which is you get your citizenship based on the place that you were born in, or there is jus sanguinis, which is, and I hope I pronounced that right, kind of your ancestry. Where were your parents citizens of? Do you automatically get citizenship because of the place where your parents were born and have citizenship? And today you see a lot of countries use kind of a mix of the two to figure out where you're a citizen of, maybe where you're a resident. To give a really easy example, I was born in New York, and therefore, because I was born in New York in the United States, I am a U.S. citizen. You can also take a look at this as my parents are both U.S. citizens. My grandparents are. We've had a long list of people in my family who were immigrants and then became citizens. And it's because of that citizenship that they then obtained, I am also now a U.S. citizen because of it. However, another example of this is I have a friend of mine who is not from here, who is a resident of the country that they're from, but they are not considered a citizen because their parents are from a different country, so therefore they hold citizenship in that country, but residentship in the country that they were born and lived in. So they do not have birthright citizenship because of the place that they were born in, but rather ancestry. Before this case even started, the place where you were born was always kind of considered the common law way of deciding where your citizenship was from here in the United States. So if you were born in the United States, way before this case, right before the 1900s, you were considered a U.S. citizen because you were born here. I also want to point out that that comes with some exceptions because, again, we were a country that was created by old white men. So, for example, enslaved people who were born here in the United States for some time were not considered U.S. citizens even though they were born here. There were also Native Americans who were not considered United States citizens even though this is their land. However, this case came at a time where a lot of people were immigrating to the United States because, again, immigration is just a natural fact of the world. People are going to move where there's better opportunities, where they can go raise their families in peace. There are lots of reasons for immigration. I can't go and list them all, even though I did work in immigration for 3.5 years. And so in this period of time, in the late 1880s, 1890s, you are seeing a lot of Chinese immigrants who are immigrating to the United States because of the California gold rush. However, a lot of people were scared of Chinese immigrants or people who came from places that were not the United States because they were seen as scary and different, terrifying, and taking opportunities from other people who were here. So in 1882, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. What this did was it restricted the amount of Chinese immigrants that could actually come into the United States and then immigrate here, gained residency, and then citizenship. Now, a really interesting tidbit of this case and with the Chinese Exclusion Act is that you already had a large Chinese population in the western part of the United States, and you were allowed to stay put if you were already here, but if for some reason you had to leave the country, maybe go see your family, and then return to the United States, you had to apply to become a resident or be here on a visa all over again, and you were considered ineligible for naturalization, aka getting citizenship. And that's how you get to the strange case of Wong Kim Ark, who was born here in the United States in San Francisco. His parents were originally from China, but because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, were ineligible for naturalization. He worked as a cook in multiple different Chinese restaurants around the Bay Area, and then he and his family went back to China, where he then married somebody and began a family. He received a lot of questioning by immigration officials whenever he had to come back into the United States, because there were questions about whether or not he was actually born here, and he would stand there and he'd say, no, I'm a US citizen, I was born here, and they would put like a little note in his file, and then they would let him back inside the United States. However, then you get one day in 1884 where he is sailing back to San Francisco, and he's stopped by immigration officials who finally look at him and say, we get that maybe you were born here in the United States, but your parents were Chinese immigrants, and therefore you have Chinese citizenship. Doesn't matter that you were born here, you are not a US citizen, you gotta go back. Wong fights back because now he's being detained on different steamboats for 5 months. You can imagine how uncomfortable that is. He says, no, according to the 14th Amendment, you state that all people who are born and naturalized here in the United States are considered US citizens. I am both of those things. It doesn't matter where my parents are from. I was born here, therefore I'm a US citizen. And there had been a lot of citizenship cases happening all across the United States. This is the one that SCOTUS decided to pick up and say, we're going to use this one to just lay out the law of the land, and they agree with Wong Kim Ark. The courts take a look at this case and they say, based on the citizenship clause that we have in the 14th Amendment, which says that as long as you're within the jurisdiction of the United States and you're born here, whether it's here in the United States or on a military base somewhere else, that you are a US citizen, that you're not being claimed by a different foreign country who claims that you are a citizen of their country. At that point in time, Wong Kim Ark was not being claimed as a citizen of China. He instead is claiming himself to be a US citizen. Let me reiterate, it did not matter that his parents were Chinese citizens. They were legal permanent residents here in the United States. Therefore, he is a valid US citizen. And I think it's important that we discuss the origin of birthright citizenship here in the United States as it is being played out in court as to whether or not people should have that here. If you take away anything from this case, damn, my gray hair. Law school ages.